Hello and welcome to my video where I'm going to show you how I made these snowflake ornaments out of polymer clay. These ornaments are not at all complicated to make and I really like the result. In order to make them, I used some white and some blue Fimo polymer clay, a plastic texture sheet with a floral design, a piece of floristry wire, although you could use a beading pin or a long needle instead, some snowflake shaped cookie cutters in at least 3 different sizes, as well as a small amount of wet and dry sandpaper, a cutting blade, an acrylic roller and some lollipop sticks, and a ceramic tile. Okay, so the first step is to cut off a block of the white clay. Then condition the clay, so warm it up in your hands and roll it out. And just repeat that until you've got a nice pliable clay. Then roll out the clay nice and flat and even. Make sure you don't roll it out too thin, you want it to be about 4 mm thick or so, and make sure it's at least as big as the largest cookie cutter you're going to use. I picked out 3 snowflake cookie cutters to use in large, medium and small sizes. The first cutter that I used was the largest and I just pushed it into the clay, like so. I then removed the excess clay from around the outside. I then pushed the medium-sized snowflake down into the clay, and I made sure that it was centered inside that larger snowflake. If you find that pressing down on these cutters hurts your hands, then try and find some kind of solid plastic sheet. I personally used a CD case. I removed the largest snowflake and then pushed the smallest snowflake into the center. I then removed the cutters, placed the texture sheet face down on top, and then lightly used the roller to emboss the clay. And here you can see that design has been transferred. Because I had just used a roller, however lightly, on top of the clay, I then needed to push the medium and small size snowflakes down into the clay, just to make sure that those cut lines had not closed up. So in hindsight, I recommend doing the texturing first, but I'll get onto that a bit later on. I then took my piece of floristry wire and fed it all the way through the snowflake, trying to go straight through the center. I tried to keep the wire parallel to the ceramic tile, and I kept on twisting it all the way through. I removed the wire and then baked the clay according to the instructions. I then did the same with the blue clay, so I conditioned it and then I rolled it out into a big enough circle. This time though, I used the texture sheet first, before the cutters. And the reason why this was much better was because then you only have to push the cutters through the clay once, and that leads to much cleaner cut lines. So after I used the texture sheet to emboss the clay, I then just pushed the cutters one at a time, from largest to smallest, into the clay, like so. If the cutter doesn't go all the way through the clay, feel free to use a craft knife just to clean up the edges. Remove the cutters, and then use the piece of floristry wire as before to make a hole through the center of the snowflake. As you can see, this time it went slightly wonky. And then you just need to bake the clay and then leave it to cool. And here you can see all the resulting pieces. In order to finish the pieces, I just lightly sanded with wet and dry sandpaper around the outside of the larger shapes. I also added a soft shine to the surface by just buffing the clay pieces on some woven cotton fabric. All this entails is just rubbing the clay on the fabric, like so. As you can see, it just adds a subtle shine to the raised areas in the embossed design. If you'd prefer a shinier finish, then feel free to add a varnish or something similar. When I put these pieces back together, I mixed and matched the blue and white pieces because I wanted some colour contrast. I also had to ensure that all of the holes in the snowflakes lined up. I then used a sewing needle and some invisible thread to go through all the snowflakes, in the order that the pieces will go together. In order to secure the thread, I then pushed a tiny bit of matching clay into the holes at the bottom of the ornaments. I then used my thumb to smooth this clay and remove any excess. Then it was baked. The excess thread at the bottom of the snowflake was cut off, and the thread at the top was made into a hanging loop. And here you can see the finished result. I also made a couple of other clay ornaments, as you can see here. And now I'll just quickly run through how I made them. For the pig ornament, I mixed together 2 shades of pink clay, and as you can see, I didn't mix them thoroughly. Instead, I left them marbled when I rolled out the clay. I cut out a circle shape and then added 2 triangles for the ears and an oval shape for the snout. I poked in 2 nostrils, and I also carved the mouth using a cocktail stick. I used a tiny bit of magenta clay for the inner ears, a tiny bit of white clay for the eyes, and a black Sharpie pen for the pupils. I then cut out a short piece of brass wire and shaped it like this, before pushing it into the top of the ornament. The reason I gave this piece of wire little feet is because those feet grip into the clay, and so it creates a much stronger join between the wire and the clay. And as for the Christmas tree, I cut it out freehand from some white clay, and I used a texture sheet to add that embossed design. Again, to finish, I just shaped a little wire loop and pushed it into the top of the ornament. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed my video, and thank you very much for watching.